Norma, we are online.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Do we have people around?
They are coming.
Should we wait?
Yeah, we can wait a minute until everybody is with us. We're already at 80 people now.
Oh, okay. So let me know then.
Yeah. We have 100 now.
Oh, okay. That's a good number.
It's still increasing quickly. 150.
Oh.
Okay, now it's slowing down a little bit. Oh, we are 160 and it's still increasing.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Yeah. I think we can start.
Yes, we are at 170. Please, Norma.
Oh, went up very quickly. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Norma Zondo. I'm the Acting Executive Director of Corporate Relations. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is our second webinar that we're running at UKZN. We're really privileged this afternoon because we have Judge Zach Jacob who's going to be addressing us this afternoon. All of us are experiencing a tremendous amount of pressure in the midst of the global pandemic. We had to change the way we work. We have to adjust to a great amount of very real and abrupt social and economical change. We are pouring our energy into work. We're looking after children at home. We are focusing on work as well while we are at home, and also going on with our daily responsibilities without obviously the usual social interaction or social exchange with our colleagues, our families or extended families. We can't even do our usual outdoor activities. So you'll find also that some people then they use their energies, they get so creative, they use their energy into spreading fake news. In light of this, our latest webinar this afternoon will be addressing fake news, lockdown, and unintended consequences. So we'll be hearing from our guest speaker, Judge Zach Jacob, who's going to be introduced shortly by Professor Petrioni, who's going to be introducing our guest speaker. And then we also have with us our facilitator, Ms. Janine Hicks, who's going to be taking care of the proceedings for this afternoon. And again, thank you so much, Shakila, for organizing the webinar for us and making sure that everybody is connected and spending this afternoon with us. And before wasting a lot of time, I would like to also thank Judge Jacob for us taking his time to come in and share his wisdom with us. Thank you so much, and enjoy the seminar. I'll then hand over to Francesco, who's going to be introducing Judge Jacob. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good afternoon. My name is Francesco Petruccione, and I have the pleasure of introducing to you Judge Jacob. Zach, as his friends call him, studied at the University of Durban-Westville. So in a certain sense, he's an alumni of UKZN, and we are very proud of him for that. But he's been even more to that, to the university, because in the years just immediately before the merger of the University of Durban-Westville and the University of KwaZulu-Natal, University of Natal, he was the chancellor. He was the last chancellor of the University of Durban-Westville. Most of you probably know him because he's been for many years a judge in our constitutional court, and he's made many contributions to the social and economic rights jurisprudence in the country. He has played lots of important roles over the years. Yeah, but maybe just to mention one as a kind of as an example, he was a member of the panel that advised our Constitutional Assembly in preparing our constitution. Yeah, and I wanted to say after his retirement, but that's probably not true because I don't think he will ever retire. Yeah, he receives lots of awards for his service to the law in South Africa, and a long list of several honorary doctorates. One of them also from UKZN. In recent years, he has been a visiting professor at many renowned universities and schools of laws, and he has served of the board of many civil society organizations, and he has been part of many commissions about which you read almost daily in the newspapers. So it is my privilege to ask now Judge Yaqub to start his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesco, and thank you to everyone. It is really an honor to be here, present among so many of you. And it's very interesting because now all of you are reduced to my level. You can't see everybody else that is participating, which is quite delightful. Congratulations and welcome to the club. I don't think you can see the whole audience, right? Which is the point I wanted to make. Anyway, it is wonderful to be here. I speak to you firstly out of a sense of some guilt because we are extremely comfortable in the lockdown. We are retired rather. We have a wonderful home and it's lovely to spend time at home and just to enjoy life, but spoiled by a very deep sense of guilt in relation to the very many poor people who suffer. And I suppose at the level between 1 and 100, most of the people that are participating here suffer at the level of between 60 and 70% only, or maybe 50%. But there are too many people in this country who suffer at the level of 95 to 100%. And that is really miserable. And I want to start definitely by saying something which is absolutely irrelevant to the topic. Let us consider the interests of the majority of suffering people in our country who have suffered a great deal already, who had suffered a lot before these troubles came upon us, and whose suffering has been increased immensely. And this has to be our focus, and hopefully we can do something about that. Now to come back to fake news. Fake news is an old topic. It started in the political sphere, started actually sometime before the American elections. It takes many forms. Many universities have done research upon it. There are many tributaries and many ways of determining what is fake news and what is not, and many ways of having an independent judgment on the issue. And some of the indicators which have been made available by many publications and by many studies of universities is to check the source, to determine whether what you see is probable or not, to determine whether what you see has a level of common sense or not, and to determine overall how many people buy into it at one level or another. That is broadly the sense of it. But the problem is that that's not the way to look at it issue. Because to be acceptable, fairly probable, to be acceptable, news has to have an element of what you read. And what it does is that catches on own prejudices. So all of us have our own prejudices. So if you Asia, you can think more easily. If you United States, believe the anti-United States thing completely, Jew and anti-Muslim, the whole lot. So thank God that that is not my analysis and my thing today. Mine is about the coronavirus and the lockdown. And for me, the lockdown
Sorry,
that all opinion is not wrong, that some is right and some is wrong, and that ultimately in the search for freedom of expression, a measure of difference of opinion has to be allowed in our society. Opinion only. Because in times of desperation like this, it is wholly legitimate to limit expression to the extent where pandemonium is not caused and to the extent where the trouble in which our society is not increased considerably. So ultimately, what do you rely on? And my own view is that we must all have the discipline to rely on the majority medical or professional opinion. The problem is that due to the introduction of the internet, we've all become doctors. You go to a family meeting after you suffered from an illness, after you've been to your doctor, and everybody who's been on the internet will prescribe a different remedy to you at one level or another. So the internet means that we have all become experts. There are no lawyers anymore, no doctors anymore. In fact, we've all become expert premiers and presidents and prime we should abide by what is the majority thinking in the world, the dominant medical, reliable thinking. That doesn't mean that we ignore other thinking. As thinking people, we take other thinking, other views into account. But that we feed into the majority opinion. And until we do nothing more about it. We listen to it, we read about it, we get informed by it. So the lockdown has to be determined by the contemporary majority opinion. And fake news, which disagrees with that majority opinion, is likely to make it look absolutely wrong and absolutely miserable because they have their own agenda at one level or another. I see no way out but to look for majority opinion. But fake news does not come only from people who disagree with majority opinion for their own reasons. Fake news or incorrect information or disinformation can also come from government itself. It is important to understand this because we are an awkward nation. Either we are completely critical of government and saying how miserable they are, or on the other hand, like now, we start hero worshipping particular people, and we begin to think, oh, there could never be a better government than this in the world. I'm saying be careful. I have no criticisms against government, but we must remember that in this day and age, government is giving out information which they have checked with no independent auditing, no independent monitoring. So let us accept, I'm not saying they are doing it, let us accept that the government too is the purveyor or can be the purveyor of fake news. And therefore, one-sided information is the worst thing you can imagine. So ultimately, one hopes that government will ensure that its information is fairly monitored independently and properly. Transparency is the only answer. There does not appear to be too much transparency in the governmental approach at the moment, which may be acceptable for now, but it has to be opened up. So fake news occurs in many different ways, in many different contexts. The determination of what's fake or not depends on the context. And finally, in the current context, it is about the majority opinion of experts, not the majority of opinion of ordinary people, the majority opinion of experts in the field. And obviously there'll be differences of opinion which we may express. So I'll talk a little later now about the consequences of lockdown, but this is all I have to say for the moment about fake news, generally fake news and the coronavirus, fake news and the government, and the fake news to retain independent thinking without causing pandemonium. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Zach. And good afternoon to all our participants, and thank you for bearing with us with the sound. We've cut our videos when not speaking to try and improve the connection. How Zach is going to be proceeding, Judge Yaqub, with his presentation is he's going to be giving it to us in 3 bites and pausing after each segment to give us an opportunity to comment and to pose questions. So for those of you who were struggling to hear, this was our first introductory component where the judge was sharing with us thoughts on fake news, how it's propagated. What we're inviting from colleagues, please, those who are participating, what the judge has put before us is that the advised approach is to support the dominant medical view. We've got a whole lot of fake news and information. We're all going online and reading about how to deal with, how to recognize implications, what the government is, how the government is going to be responding. But the call is to support the dominant medical view, stay with that majority view. We'd like to invite comments from our participants now. Can you advise us, are there any other ways in which we can manage and respond to fake news that's being disseminated in relation to COVID-19? How can you assist us in supplementing these ideas? For now, the idea on the table is support the dominant medical view. But how do we check that source? How do we use the common sense filter? How do we ascertain what the majority are buying into? We'd welcome some views from participants. We invite you to use the Q&A feature in the Zoom chat. If you go to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Q&A. If you click on that and type your comments, I'm hoping to be able to catch those and put them to Judge Yaqub for his comment. At the moment, Judge, we have 2 questions that have been put forward. And that is in relation to how the primary information on COVID-19 is being disseminated to people. And related to that is, to whom is this information intended? For instance, yesterday we heard our president announce a whole range of relief packages that have been made available and social assistance. Is this information supposed to be addressing non-citizens? To whom is that support available? So those 2 questions have been put forward already, with a suggestion already from another participant. Can we have clarity on an official site or an official source where people can collect information? If you perhaps want to comment on those for now.
Okay. I think that in South Africa for the moment, our official local source in terms of the nature of the disease, how it spreads and how it is communicated at that expert level is the medical content of our national governance area, as they call it. That should be to them and working through with them. We have a medical component which appears to be sensible, and we need to look at it. That doesn't mean that they mustn't be questioned. When there are questions, those questions must be put up in the media and elsewhere without gluing them down too much and without making them look absolutely irrelevant and inefficient. information is being conveyed through mass on the TV, on the radio stations, publicity material in terms of pamphlets and so on, to lead particular places for people to pick up, to ensure that this information is rendered more accessible. That is the problem. I accept that the information it is reaching the international arena, who say that our sector and our commercial sector, who, subject of course to the absence of the sale of liquor and cigarettes, say that the movement, that our measures are still very good. It is not addressing poor people, it is not communicating to poor people, nor, I think, is there a system which communicates between the millions of people who have nothing and the powers that be. And if we can get some sort of structure to communicate that information, it will be very good.
Okay. Judge, there are a whole host of comments coming through. A few people have been speaking to the need to identify credible sources. Quite often they're concerned that the media is in fact encouraging people to access and come up and peddle their own views. Should the media perhaps not be curtailed? Is a question as asked by another participant, can we accept that the mainstream media is in fact portraying the majority medical opinion? And should we not be able to disagree with that majority opinion? Perhaps you want to comment on that.
I think I made it quite plain that we must be able to disagree with that majority medical opinion, but carefully and sensibly. Secondly, obviously, the media can overstep the mark. And we have our systems. We have a whole range of people, freedom of expression institutes and others. And we must feel free to criticize the media and to ensure that the media approach is adjudicated. There is an organization of which I'm the chair of the appeal panel, I might as well advertise it now, which is called Real 11, which is a body to whom complaints can be made in relation to fake news on the electronic digital media. They're recognized by government. Sorry, 411. They are recognized by government. Real 411 can communicate information, and they will make adjudications on each complaint that is made and bring it back to you. There's an appeal panel, and just for a little advertisement, I'm the chair of that appeal panel. So the more you complain, the more the work I'll have to do for nothing if people appeal against that judgment. It's a very credible panel which looks at it and works it out. But I think we must always complain, and there must always be systems available to us.
Judge, we seem to be the kind of views that are coming forward now talking about the two different sources of information. On the one hand, we have the majority medical and medical technical opinion, and people are expressing the need to navigate those processes, and you're speaking about the use of a panel of experts, peer-reviewed articles, for instance, and information. But people cite the fact that they're struggling with the detail of information, that we can't get detail of infection and death rates within our own cities and towns, and we've got to go to John Hopkins sites to obtain that information. So concerns about that dominant medical view, how that information is put out, how we can ensure that it is correct and appropriate. And then on the other hand of the spectrum, we have social media and reports coming through the media that result in panic buying, panic responses, and fake news impacting on the public.
Okay, I think that part of the reason for the social media and the panic reactions, it must be said, is because of the dearth and insufficiency and lack of detail and inconsistency in government information. What is clear is that quite often there's an inconsistency. Government information is issued nationally. I think that we must appeal to government urgently to create a national, regional, and local information system which complies with particular requirements. Because I agree completely that part of the reason why we get fake news is because there is not enough detail in relation to the real news. And that's why it is important for the media to ensure that we get this information regularly. There should be a time every day, a fixed time, when every municipality, when every province says to the people exactly what the position is in their area, and there should be a fixed time every day when information is released and an announcement is made. Part of the trouble is that our national people have no respect for people. They let you know the time in the last possible minute as if they are the bosses of everything. And then when they say 8 o'clock, then the president will start talking to you at 8:30 because he suddenly gets busy about something, as if what he has to do is less important than we are. We must have the discipline of expecting fixed time, daily information, which we particularize to start with, which we can increase particulars that we require of as time goes on. But we must know that every day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, eThekwini will release certain information. Every day at 8 o'clock, the national will release certain information. Every day at 5 o'clock, the province will release certain information. And we should interact with the authorities to make sure that the information is right. I agree that the information release is haphazard, almost as if God deciding when God will do what. There's no accountability, no obligation, no punctuality either.
Thank you, Judge. I think I know we're needing to move on to your next segment, but perhaps if you can just respond to the following few points. One question that keeps coming through the feed is, how do we ensure that we get accurate information to those with no access to media or limited access to correct medical views and information, particularly township and rural residents? People have raised issues of concern. A second point that people are raising is how to help people recognize and determine what is fake news, is that we need to have more education to the public about fact-checking and not just accepting news. And we need to see more prosecutions of those who are promoting fake news.
Okay. I don't think you're going to educate people in the short term about how to check fake news. And that is why I've advanced a simple thing, which is that we must tell people that for now, they must accept the dominant theory and the dominant thesis and the dominant method. It is the only way, subject to the right of questioning. We're not going to be able to get people to question and learn and determine. This is a process which takes hundreds of years. It's a wonderful thing, but it can't be done quickly, realistically. But secondly, as I've already said, the universities are one area, and other organizations too can develop processes by which, as I said earlier, as soon as any information is given, local, provincial, national, there must be teams of people involved in our universities and various other places who sit down and do the work and produce the material and render it accessible in many, many ways. And I think there's a lot of work to do as far as that is concerned. I think with your permission, I'm going to carry on with the second area, which is the unintended consequences of lockdowns and things of that sort. Firstly, I think that unintended consequences emerge more if the lockdowns do not have a buy-in from the people. Ultimately, lockdowns must have buy-in, and ultimately, if the lockdowns are simply strict for the sake of strictness itself, even though I have said that we must obey them, and we must, the natural human inclination, and this is what government has got to be aware of, the natural human inclination is to abide by only what they think. And if the government goes too far, that is an absolute recipe for two things. It is a recipe for not obeying, which means that you go too far at your own peril. And I think that the government going too far with its restrictions creates the kind of discontent which opens up the minds of the people to fake news. And therefore, overaction by the government fertilizes soil for fake news inestimably. And those plants will grow worse than the worst of weeds ultimately. So they've got to keep the ground clean. They've got to make sure that these things don't happen. As far as unintended consequences are concerned, I think part of the problem is that in a society which has problems of inequality, has problems of all kinds of discrimination against all kinds of people, which has problems of such serious poverty, times like these exacerbate those differences and point to those differences. So you will have poor people being looked down upon more and more because they understand less and less. And we've got to make sure that we counter that in some ways. You're going to have more and more a situation where even gay and lesbian people are going to be regarded as improper and wrong and doing the wrong thing and causing trouble. So that is the consequence which we must bear in mind. This is the time for us to learn more about equality, to learn more about human respect, and to ensure that we recognize human beings for who they really are. So that is an unintended consequence that the poor will suffer more. But the problem about unintended consequences is not just that we talk about it and keep quiet about it. We need to ensure that we put processes in place to avoid ultimately these so-called unintended consequences. And the way in which we need to avoid it is to make sure that we get things right. Most people want to rely on other people to make sure that other people do things right. And I think that whatever the misinformation may be, there's absolutely no harm in all of us ensuring that we protect ourselves, that we protect others, and we preserve distance. Whatever fake news they may be, there can be absolutely nothing wrong with that. So we must do those things which are recommended, which do us no harm. Whether they might as well do them because they do us no harm. The unintended consequence is that we start believing fake news and start using cures to the exclusion of other cures. So if someone says, eat garlic to get rid of the virus and not to have the virus affect you, eat garlic if you like to, but please do the other thing too. Do what everybody says you must do. Don't just say, if I eat garlic, there's no need for me to preserve distances and so on. So there's no problem about alternative remedies. Adhere to alternative remedies as much as we want to adhere to them, but we need to make sure that we get these right. The other consequence, which is half intended and half unintended, is the limitation of constitutional rights. Our constitution has limited freedom considerably, and many people are taking advantage of this. But we must remember that our government, through laws of general application, do have the right to limit our fundamental rights and freedoms, provided that these rights are justifiable in an open and democratic society based on dignity, equality, and freedom. I emphasize not freedom alone, but dignity, equality, and freedom. So freedom is not in our country licensed to do what you want, to make as much money as you want to, and so on. So we need to limit those rights, that those rights are limitable. Now, as far as liquor is concerned, for example, there's no doubt that liquor does have all sorts of awkward consequences as far as society is concerned. Motor accidents, difficulties with hospitals, and so on and so on. Whether prohibition is the only route to go is an interesting one. Because if, for example, you reduce the tolerance level to 0 tolerance for drivers, and make sure that all drivers who drive vehicles, even with 0.5% of alcohol, or quarter, or hardly anything, but very little in their blood vessels, must go to jail for 3 weeks without any problem, should be absolutely fine. So there are other ways of doing it. The cigarette ban is less problematic, but still, let's stick by it for a while and see what happens. The hot food ban is even less acceptable, but let's go with it and see until such time that government is able to do it. Let us who can obey, and persuade government to ensure that there is then, until it becomes absolutely unbearable, those of us who obey must obey. But there is a limit to freedom. There's a constitutional limit to freedom, and those limitations are controversial. They are controversial because people don't like being limited. But we have consented to the rule of law. And the rule of law means that until a government action is set aside, we must comply with it. We have every right to go to a court to fight the limitation. And until and unless we have won those limitations, won those court actions, until a court says we are right, we have to comply. We are not, as each individual, the source of our own authority. Our actions can be limited by government. The government limits them. We obey. If we have a problem with it, we do two things. We criticize and try and persuade the government to adopt another view, and we go to court, and ultimately we obey the majority court. We must guard against, each of us as individuals, particularly in this time, developing our own approach to what is right and what is not right. That is a problem, because that level of individual freedom has to be curtailed at this point. I'd be very, very liberal about individual freedom at all kinds of levels had it not been for the virus. But in terms of the presence of the virus, the curtailment of individual freedom is the smallest price we pay. And the curtailment of individual freedom in the interest of human dignity and true equality, I would suggest, is a wonderful thing to do. So bottom line, we must obey however insensitive or bad we think the regulations are, unless we are going to be done tremendous harm, in which case we fight against it. We go to court through organizations and so on if we don't like it, and then if the court sets it aside, we obey. This is not the time for each of us to do our own thing. I think I'll stop here for the unintended consequences bit.
Thank you, Judge. So you've touched on two components of this really, and I see there's interest in both components, so perhaps we'll just take one at a time. So your starting point was that we have difference of opinion and reaction to the lockdown measures and the regulations that have been adopted by the state. The one point that you made, Judge, was that these affect different people in different ways, and that we see unintended consequences in that harms are caused, that poor and marginalized groups particularly might be most vulnerable or might be most harmed. and you asked how we can avoid or mitigate those unintended consequences. So that's one area of conversation for us to focus on. The second point that you made, Judge, was looking at the actual measures that have been imposed by the state, whereas some may criticize that these constitute a limitation of freedoms. Other speakers and participants in the group say that we're treating people like babies, telling people that they can't buy alcohol and cigarettes. You're putting forward the case, though, Judge, that it's necessary to curtail those individual freedoms so that we can see benefit for all, which is flattening the curve, obviously, and reducing the infection rate. But should we start with that first component? The question is, how can we mitigate those unintended consequences? How can we reduce the harms and the vulnerabilities on different communities as a result of the lockdown? You cited instances of gay and lesbian, of poor people. I'd like to know if there are any views coming through from our participants on mitigating consequences. Do you want to comment further in the interim?
Okay, let me comment. I think the long-term way of mitigating these consequences is to develop our own human rights culture. So even now, we have the opportunity in our homes to talk about these things, in our phone calls to friends and so on, to use this as an opportunity to talk about the importance of equality, to talk about the importance of our society, to talk about the importance of our humanity. And I am quite sure that if each of 200 or 300 of us talk to 20 or 30 other people and so on, the impact, particularly in the middle and upper classes, can be exponential. And if we get a change in the point of view of middle and upper class people towards those people who have nothing, and if we use this opportunity to develop a degree of sympathy and a degree of an understanding of their position and to do something towards it, we may have created a new culture which will last a very, very long time.
Judge, when we were preparing for this webinar, you were challenging us, noting that we are a university community in particular, and talking about, and perhaps that's something we can put to the community who's listening in today, what role can we play in particular as the university community in, for instance, if we feel the harm being caused by police, for instance, who demanding that people produce permits for going to the chemist, or where we see abuse of power of police, and developing guidelines, putting information out into the public space, entering into public-private partnerships. How can we react and respond and support as a university community? A participant has put forward the question about how do we take action against SAPS and the South African Defence Force when they're abusing the rights of poor people who aren't able to challenge those in court?
That is a very, very important question. And I think as universities, we can do a number of things. Firstly, police don't know. They have not been trained. That is the problem. And therefore, we need training manuals. We need training things. And we need to make sure that universities offer themselves up, the law departments and others, to create training manuals, to offer training, video training to people in the police force in relation to how they can exercise their duties without killing anybody and without doing undue harm. It is not enough for the president to make a speech about it and for the minister to make a speech about it in the effort to ensure that everybody else will comply. The police need training. The training they have now was brought up during apartheid times, how to treat the people as badly as you possibly can. Marikana was an indication of that. Many statements about our current Minister of Police, there are some exceptions, but many statements are just uncivilized and horrible in many, many ways. What better way to encourage, I asked the minister, non-compliance with the rules than by forcing compliance in the way in which he tries to do. So we need to train. Secondly, we go to prison. When the minister breaks the rules, the minister loses 2 months' pay, and that is about it. It is you see, we must not bring out our anger on the ordinary people who break the rules. It is for leaders and leadership to set the example. Let us punish our leaders more than we punish the ordinary people in the country. Let us punish the rich more than we punish the poor. Let us punish the educated because they should know better more than we punish the uneducated. Our whole method of enforcement is in reverse. We punish poor and vulnerable people, and when the police do something wrong, very few police are arrested. But the minister will say, yes, this is terrible, we have to do things and so on. Very many thousands of ordinary people, poor people have been arrested. Very few police people have been arrested. No ministers have been arrested, although some ministers have been guilty of arrestable offenses, in my view. And provided that we make sure, the president makes sure that he treats the ministers in the same way as poor people, then it's fine. It's not for the minister of police to cry when things like these happen. He must take responsibility, and he must take ultimate responsibility because he is paid by the taxpayer to do that.
Judge, first of all, can I remind participants, please post your questions on the Q&A platform, not the chat platform, just so that we can see everyone's points. Judge, 2 different sets of points are coming through, probably just to wrap up this section. There's a lot of agreement that it seems as though law enforcement officers don't know how to apply the regulations. They're creating them as they go along. They seem to have incorrect views on what the law in fact is. We're seeing comments made by people is that the police are focusing on the wrong thing. Their priority should be on curbing the spread by educating the poor and uninformed, and supporting community policing came through one of our earlier chats, instead of looking for ways to punish rule breakers. So those are some of the views on the police. An interesting view on lawyers is what role are they playing? Many want to get into their offices to continue their work and earn a living, but very few lawyers are talking about assisting the poor during this time. Refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, those are very vulnerable categories of people, and the legal profession seems to be disorganized in how it's responding to this pandemic.
I mentioned the law departments at universities. I'll deal with the first question later in my concluding remarks because that is a very important issue. But as far as lawyers are concerned, I agree that not enough of lawyers are making their contribution. We have the usual culprits, the Section 27s of this world, the legal resources centers of this world, and so on, who in our country make a contribution and work very hard at very little money. It is the money makers who must start making a contribution, the money maker lawyers. And 90% of our lawyers make more money than they need. So basically it is these lawyers which need to make a contribution, and not only law departments at universities, but lawyers. They must start making free wills. They must start contacting people and saying they are available. They must create online things so that they become available online. Lawyers don't need to open their offices to be there. They can make themselves available online and do everything they need to do online and properly, and make all kinds of arrangements. Of course, it is necessary to ensure that people who sign documents do indeed sign them. And I think that in this day and age, witnessing by video is also a possibility. The thing about false videoing and false impressions being conveyed, don't think enough of us have enough expertise of that in this country to make that an absolute reality. So let us use the video systems we have. Let lawyers continue to do the work. But it is for lawyers to ensure that that measures are understood, that people wrongly convicted are properly defended, that the regulations are clearly and properly drafted, that the regulations are understood by people. And it'll be wonderful if, for example, unlike the universities, if the lawyers were to form a syndicate to say, this is a lawyers' network on which certain information will be available on the net every day at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, in the same way as we ask government to do so.
Great, thank you. But I think in addition to the recommendations that you've made, I'm seeing also suggestions of what can the university do. We should be calling on retired alumni with legal training to assist. Others are stating that lawyers are struggling, lawyers can't assist. There's difficulty with the permit system and we're confined to home. But perhaps, Judge, if you want to move into your third component.
Okay, so I think that we are confined to home, that we all have internet, etc., etc., and therefore they can help. And lawyers must have the ingenuity to do so. So how do we sum up this session? Where have we got to? And I want to start by talking about the effectiveness of criminal sanction. We have sanctions against rape, but rape continues in this society. We have sanctions against abuse, and abuse continues in our society. We have sanctions against all kinds of crime, but that crime continues to exist. And therefore, in the world, and to an extent in our country, there has developed the concept of what people call restorative justice. In the ultimate analysis, punishment cannot be the only way to prevent crime, because we know that punishment by itself doesn't work. The only long-term way to prevent crime is to ensure, and it applies to all crime, to ensure that we determine what the conditions in society are which give rise to that crime, and ensure ultimately that we remove those conditions as far as we possibly can. At a broad level, those conditions amount to poverty, lack of education, and so on, which are very difficult in a general sense to remove. But the removals are also the result of ignorance, which we can cure. At the COVID-19 level, we can identify those conditions which cause non-compliance. The first is the lack of understanding, which we need to dispel by a great deal of publicity. The second is the feeling that the government is going too far. And there's a two-way approach. The one is to ensure that the government doesn't go that far. And the second is to persuade people that government is actually not going too far. And the third is to bring cases to ensure that people have other things to do. But finally, what we've got to do in our society actually is to develop a culture in our society in which we begin to understand what law really is, and to create in our society a culture of humanity, a culture of consideration for human beings, a culture which makes us to understand that money is not all, which makes us understand that pleasure is not all, and which makes us understand that we have to do a great deal of work to ensure that our humanity, which is today underdeveloped, is developed more and more to save our society. Because ultimately, the more people understand why they are doing wrong things, that they are doing wrong things, the less that they will do it. The more people understand that ultimately we are bettering society not for the sakes of other people, we're making our contribution to better society for our own sakes, because actually we want to live in a society which is better. Speaking for myself, I do these things for totally selfish motives. And that's because I find it very painful to live in this society. And the better the society gets, the less painful it gets for me to live in it. So ultimately, that is the message I would like us to end on. To end on the message that let us obey government, let us do what we can, let us work through fake news, let us ensure that we don't all start becoming individual authorities. The line between the extent of our own discipline, the extent of our own freedom, and the extent of doing what we are told is quite blurred. But let us understand that that freedom is more necessarily blurred in our kind of society. And I'd like this to be the beginning of a conversation. I'd like us to evaluate how far we've gone, whether things are getting better or worse, and what is actually happening. And let us hope that for starters, those organizing this conference will put together and put out on some kind of channel a set of concrete recommendations which have come out of this, asking for volunteers to contribute to the elimination of those recommendations and to create the kind of society with which we want to have. So we have 3 minutes left, and I end here, and we leave. I leave, but I just stay to see what other comments we have and what final comments I need to make.
Thank you, Judge. We've got 3, I would say, clusters again. I think people are welcoming your notion of accountability, that's an important component of the response. But I'm afraid our cynical viewers are saying, what about those high-level bureaucrats, those high-profile ministers? We're needing to see accountability at those levels for non-compliance and for putting out false information. Secondly, welcoming, yes, you're calling for the need for information needs to be put out as another means of combating fake news. And people are reiterating your comments that that should be regular, it should be consistent, it should be transparent. People are reiterating the right to question, particularly if you're within the medical community. We should be able to question, and express a different opinion without ourselves being targeted or accused of peddling fake news. People have also been problematizing when we're disseminating information and we're calling on community leaders, a concern about religious leaders who might be distorting that information. And then finally, Judge, sorry if I'm bombarding you with them all, but in that notion of building a culture of humanity, an appeal for us to not be perpetuating different classes of citizens. When we talk about our people, are we excluding foreign nationals and migrants within our community? That we should ensure that our language is embracing all who are living and being in South Africa. And then I see there's a final call from colleagues from the basic income grant days. Can we not maintain this 350 Rand for people who are not working? If we're talking about building a culture of humanity, recognizing that we have people who are falling through the cracks of our social support systems.
Okay, thank you very much. All I can say is thank you very much for being here. I think we have lots of good ideas. And I think that the social grant it'll be good if it can continue. Most of the other questions that are asked, I think, have fairly rhetorical answers. I don't want to deal with them. There's too little time anyway. Let us investigate, think, take this pandemic very seriously, and really make sure that we do what we say, which is to ensure that our society, in the end, does benefit and learn something new from it all. And of course, the foreign nationals issue is absolutely right. We disregard foreign nationals at our peril, and I hope that we will learn that on the agenda as well, and make sure that foreign nationals are properly treated. And we have got to make sure that the safety net is available to foreign nationals as well, and we've got to make sure that we fight for it. Right.
I think we're back to you.
Yeah, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't find my microphone. Zach, it is my duty to thank you profusely for spending this afternoon with us and for sharing your views on some of the topics that interest us all. So thank you very much from all of us. And we had about 250 participants listening to your talk. So your words will have a big impact, and we'll probably start from today the exponential increase towards the society that you envisage. So thank you very much again to you, and thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much to the participants. And we apologize that at some stages the audio was not perfect, but that was beyond our control. So thank you very much again to everybody, and have a good evening.
Okay, that's it.